Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Fire Emblem, Crimson Flower in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, The Black Eagle House. Now that it was finally decided what house that the twins were to teach, they had only to tell the Archbishop Rhea about their choice. By then, the students were already expected to return to their respective lessons. As they were walking, the twins noticed that the Black Eagle House had no such teacher coming in to take care of them. Whilst this was a curious observation, it had all suddenly made sense once more thought was put into it. Byleth had remembered that Rhea mentioned how their teacher ran away at the first sighting of bandits. It was ironic that the exact class where their old teacher had run away from, would end up being the very class that the twins were picking. There were still much more pressing matters to attend to after this was over. When he recalled back into his memories, Byleth had remembered how his father had asked to see him at a safer time. Before they were set to teach, this had to be done. He had not forgotten about this request from his father, as it was one of massive importance. As they ascended up the stairs into Rhea's chambers, Byleth took one more look into their surroundings. The walls of the academy were carved precisely with care, whilst the patterns on the floor were made with extreme delicacy. This was not just any academy. Even if the twins had never been to an institute like this in their lifetime, they could tell just how large the scale of this one truly was. With such a glamorous building, their task seemed even more daunting to do. With a look of determination, the twins pressed forward. Their next destination, Rhea's chambers. This time when they had entered, it was not Seath standing beside Rhea. Rather, he was situated towards the left of the room, whilst Manuela and Hanneman occupied his previous spot. From this, it was easy to gather that Rhea had known about their given offer of choosing a class to teach. This was perfect for the two, as now their two requests given from these people had coincided with one another. When Rhea had asked them to meet the students, it had also fit perfectly in helping them decide who they were to teach. In noticing this, Byleth could not help but feel as if this was planned out. I see you have finally made a decision. Rhea smiled gently at them. Professor Hanneman and Manuela have told me about their offer. What house is it that you wish to teach, dear children? Silence had come forth for a moment. In this time spent with little sound, the twins had faced their heads at each other with determination and nodded in readiness. The way they saw it, this was a class that was perfect for them. If their previous teacher had left, then it only made sense for them to pick the very class that suffered from this loss. Even after their encounter with Edelgard and when the curious individual of Bernadetta came into their lives, Byleth was still rather skeptical of this whole ordeal. However, in seeing his sister so happy to be doing this, he could not help but feel he may have picked the correct choice. I'd like for us to pick the Black Eagle House, Byleth said, with vigor. In an instant, everyone could see her resolve when saying this. It was only then that Byleth realized just how passionate his sister was about picking this class. If it were not for the words of Linhard, Petra, and Bernadetta, then this may have never been a possibility. When seeing Byleth with a determined look, Manuela chuckled to herself. How precious. Not even I was that straightforward when I was around your age. This seems to fit quite perfectly with Manuela and I, Hanneman added. As we were accustomed to our previous classes, it would only make sense that you pick the one whose instructor escaped from. I dare say that I was hoping for you to pick them. Did you talk with all of our available students? Rhea had cut in before a response could be said. This time, Byleth gave her brother a signal for him to take over the reins of conversation again with a simple pull of his sleeve. We were both very peculiar about the students in the academy. As such, we had even managed to make conversation with even the most reclusive of them. The image of Bernadetta had fled into his mind at that moment. Are you positive that it is the Black Eagles in which you wish to impart your knowledge toward? Rhea had offered a gateway to leave this decision, in case Byleth had misspoke. My sister is very passionate about this class. I too would like to see their growth. If it will not be too much, I too would like for us to teach them. Rhea sighed knowing that this was their final choice. Very well. I do hope that you take care of yourselves. Should you have any queries, then feel free to contact any of us in this very room. We appreciate your offer. Seath, Rhea had now turned to her advisor. Please would you be so kind as to tell them what will transpire in 2 days? Certainly, Ria. Immediately, Seath had walked forward to assert himself over the twins. During the first month of their school year, the students are pitted to fight the opposing houses in a yearly mock battle that takes place on the 30th of the Great Tree Moon. This is where all of us can evaluate the progress of the students in the coming year, and make predictions over their future and what to pursue academically. I trust that you can tell it is of great importance for it to take place. The twins were taken aback by this new event. In such a short amount of time, they were to send their new students off into a battle against the other houses. As they had just taken them as their own, it was a wonder as to how they should approach this new circumstance. With such an important battle ahead, Billette knew she had to speak up, even if she knew she was not meant to. Wait a second. Don't you think it's a little early for us? We cannot postpone this event, regardless of your personal feelings. I agree that it is a little unfair towards your end of the deal, sighed Billette with authority. But I trust that someone of your caliber can get out of this in good form. It is not necessary that you win, but that you perform to our standards. Don't you think you're being too harsh? You are now a professor. Last I checked, it was your duty to adapt to new circumstances. Do that, and you will further prove how capable you are. Billette was going to argue even more, but her brother had quickly stepped in by tugging her sleeve. When she got this signal, Billette realized that she was overstepping her boundaries. It had infuriated her that Seath saw them as a simple detriment to the academy. Even if it was somewhat understandable, she could not stand to be around his presence. In being as composed as he had ever been, Byleth simply spoke with assurance. We will get it done as best we can. Byleth had wanted to cheer up his sister from Seath's aggression. With little time to spend, I fear that we won't be able to uncover all of our students' abilities. May you permit us to go see them? Billette's face lit up once her brother had said this. After she realized that Byleth was trying to cheer her up, she simply began to ignore Seath, so that she could look forward to the coming future. When Ria looked at them, she had seen every little strategy that Byleth was planning. She, too, was capable of great knowledge, and in seeing how caring the siblings were towards one another, she thought to allow their wishes to be fulfilled. You may go see your students. With 2 days left, I wish you the best of luck. Finally, Ria had let go of her smile. As the twins were getting ready to leave, Seath faced them in curiosity. In the time that he had seen them, he found very little of them to be useful. These were mercenaries who knew very little about the very world they inhabited, so how were they to teach a whole class of students? Regardless, he knew that he had to add one final note of guidance to them. Before you leave, you should know that only 5 of your 9 students are allowed to fight. Our battlefield is much too small to conduct a full simulation. You may decide what you will with this information, but I wish you the best of luck. Byleth acknowledged this information, but chose not to reply to Seath. Instead, he simply nodded his head to him, and he began to lead his sister to the exit. With the closing of the doors, everyone in the room looked at Ria out of curiosity. She did not say anything. Rather, Ria simply muttered unrecognizable words to herself, and then looked upon the mural window on the front of the room. With a long time to pass before her plans could finally come into fruition, Ria had to simply wait till her desired results would come true. Soon enough, she would achieve her ambitions. On a rare occasion, Ria had ordered for classes to be cancelled early for today. Whilst some students were celebrating, there were others who saw this as an ample opportunity to brush up in their combat skills. With the big mock battle to take place in 2 days, every student who was participating was sent into a stage of intense training. However, there was one class that could not be dismissed yet. The Black Eagles currently had no teacher to dismiss them. For the last half an hour, Casper had spent his time admiring the window's view of freedom as he saw the other students pass by. Edelgard would normally have told him to get back to his seat, however there was no reason to do so. For a while, everyone was sitting in their seats, waiting for something to happen to them. Do you think they forgot to dismiss us? Dorothea was beginning to grow worried. What if we could actually leave right now? I don't think they would mind, right? Thankfully, Petra was one of the only students who had been thinking logically. We will be waiting now. I have assurance that someone will come. Ah, don't kid yourself, Petra, Casper groaned. We've been in here for so long that Linhard's already fallen asleep. There was a brief silence as everyone looked towards Linhard lying on his desk. Actually, he does sleep a lot, but regardless, I say we head out of here. Hubert looked over at the window which had occupied Casper's attention in an attempt to find someone of importance to them. Patience would normally do us well to learn, but right now Lady Edelgard has a lot of training to do for the mock battle. This is not treatment befitting a noble. Ferdinand finally snapped. Having to wait here for almost an hour does not translate well to my acceptance. In an instant after he had said this, Dorothea glared at him. So, are you saying that the common folk should be the ones waiting? No, you misunderstand. Ferdinand began to stutter as he spoke. I simply mean that treatment such as this is uncommon for us. I did not imply that the common folk are deserving of this. The room was beginning to get tense. As sunset was already visibly starting to make its way, this had only heightened the suspense and worry of the class. As their house leader, Edelgard had wanted to assure her classmates. From Petra's previous report, it seemed likely that the new mercenaries would come in to introduce themselves, so why were they not coming now? Disregarding this information, Edelgard quickly snapped back into reality to cease the fighting. Dorothea, now is not the time for this. We're all tired. We shouldn't continue doing this, lest we will end up even more fatigued. Dorothea sighed. You're right, Edie. I'm sorry, Ferdy. Even for me, that was uncalled for. I'll try to be nicer to you, but you should know you're still a bee in my eyes. I still do not quite understand what you are getting at by calling me a bee. Nevertheless, I shall accept your gift of apology. Ferdinand held out his hand out for Dorothea to shake, however she had pretended to ignore this. After giving a quizzical look towards her, Ferdinand began to rest on his table. Whilst he used to avoid doing this at any cost, so as not to damage his reputation, there was a good reason for doing it on this particular day. It did not take long for everyone else to follow his example. Eventually, even Casper had returned to his table to rest. The door suddenly produced a knocking sound. Almost everyone was jolted upright, with the exception of Linhard. Realizing that she should be the one to open it, Edelgard rose up and assured her students with a smile that she would be the one to rid them of the unnecessary chore. When going up to the door, she felt as if their new teacher would arrive. It was somewhat a miraculous feeling, but it was also one that was to be gotten rid of soon enough. With her biggest breath of excitement, and slowest of suspenseful turns, the knob of the classroom door was turned. Sorry I'm late. I got caught up with my room. It was Bernadetta. Instantly, everyone had slumped down in defeat. Somehow, they had all forgotten that Bernadetta was a part of this class. With how she would always disappear in the beginning of recess, it made sense. With such little interactions that the students had made with her, they realized that Bernadetta would only speak to them unless absolutely necessary. It's okay, Bernadetta. Edelgard opened the way for her to come in. Right now we're just waiting for our new professor, or anyone in general, really. Oh, okay. She rushed to her seat next to Linhard and sat down on a quick whim. Bernie's not in trouble after all. No one had heard her muttering to herself. With a heavy sigh, Edelgard had left without closing the door. When the gush of air came in, Linhard had made a quick shout in shock. Now that he was finally awake, he looked to the direction of the door. I simply find it repulsive for you all to be trying to get me awake. I still do my class work, you know. He turned back to his own table, but instead of sleeping, he saw Bernadetta doodling on her own notebook. What is it that you are drawing, Bernadetta? In response, she slammed the book shut and moved it far away from his reach. And nothing. It's only for the eyes of Bernie. You must deem yourself quite lucky that I'm not too interested in your childish doodles. He was too busy yawning to see his peer's face of annoyance. My sleep triumphs all responsibilities, but my own interests, that is. This statement had annoyed Edelgard immediately. Linhard, your talent is being wasted upon. When will you learn? It is my talent after all. I can choose to do what I will with it. Casper moaned from his table. Edelgard, just don't bother. As his longtime friend, I've spent years trying to get him to sleep less and work more. It never works. It seems ignorance can breed even more ignorance. Hubert laughed at Casper's warning. Rest assured, what Lady Edelgard can achieve, goes far beyond levels to the things in which you cannot. Casper was too tired to argue. Not even Bernadetta could find peace, as she had noticed that Linhard was growing his curiosity towards the drawings and paintings within her notebook. With one slump of defeat, the entire Black Eagle house were all simultaneously wishing for the day to end, so they had good reason to return to their own dormitories. All of them were determined not to fall asleep. With the passing of time, finally something else happened. A knock was heard, this time from the walls of the building. The class got up, finally realizing that this was most likely a messenger telling them to leave, but it was not the case. "We're sorry that we couldn't come to you sooner." It was the sight of Billette peeking her head out of the door. "Me and my brother were discussing how we should handle the mock battle. Anyways, good evening, class." Byleth had walked beside her and gave a small nod. In an instant, Billette could not contain herself. With uncanny speed and reflex, she ran to the huddle of students and looked at them with glowing eyes. With each stare she gave towards each student, she smiled even brighter. When it ended with Bernadetta and Linhard fighting over her notebook, Billette was inclined to walk towards them. "Hey, Linhard, was it?" She snatched the book from Linhard and gifted it back to its original owner. "I suppose you were right. We're going to be your new professors." Only then did this settle in with the Black Eagles. Suddenly, nobody had wanted to exit the class. Instead, they had all started crowding around the siblings in pure wonder and curiosity. "Two teachers? This is insane!" Casper screamed across the class. "Forget that, they look way younger than our other ones." Dorothea interrupted. A few more comments came from the rest of the class now. "My understanding is complete. You meant what was spoken of before, to be that you would be teaching us. Can we go to sleep now? I hope that your talents in actual combat will be better than how inexperienced you look. To have multiple teachers in one classroom, even for a noble, this is most unusual. Come on Bernie, say hello." "Oh, I can't do it." Bernadetta began to crouch down beneath the table, but everyone was much too fixed on their new professors to have worried for her. Billette was ecstatic over their reactions. "I'm as envious as you are, but let's start fresh for a minute." She did a playful courtesy. "My name is Billette, but you're free to call me the old Professor Billette, if it suits you. My brother's name is Byleth, but you can call him Professor Byleth." He looked over to his sister in dismay. "What did I tell you about establishing authority before we came in here to talk to them? You know I can't do that. Is acting proper not in your forte? Hey, I can act serious when I want to." She pointed accusingly at him. "It's just now that I don't want to." That is even worse. When seeing this interaction, the class could not help but laugh at this. In the middle of their introductions, these two individuals had started bickering between themselves. It was true that they had known about the rivalry between Manuela and Hanneman, but this was a different sort of conflict. It was clear that the two had cared for each other as siblings, so when they fought, they held back just enough so as not to hurt the other side. When the twins had noticed their laughing, they quickly stopped arguing to focus on their new students. The first one to speak of the group was Petra. "I like that you are teaching us. You have a gut." Both of the teachers were confused by this. "Thanks." "Oh, Petra." Dorothea smiled at her innocence. "I'm sure you mean that they have guts." "That is what I said. They are having the gut." The twins found Petra's pattern of speech amusing to hear. It was clear she struggled with communicating with the class, but it was also nice to realize that the rest of her peers were welcoming and considerate of her. "Wait, can I go to sleep in my dorm yet?" Linhard did yet another yawn. Byleth faced him immediately to address. "Under normal circumstances, you are permitted to leave at this time. However, Thanks." It was at this moment that Linhard began walking out of the room before Byleth could continue. "I'm done for the evening. Pleasure meeting you, professors." Just then, Bernadetta had chased after him. "I'm going to. Sorry, but I don't want to get in the way." Byleth ran after them, yelling, "But you are not causing us grief." However, they had already left. Byleth simply put her hand on her brother's shoulder. "I wouldn't worry about them. I think they work best alone. Under normal circumstances, I would not be concerned too much over this if you talked me into it, but we have just lost 2 candidates to participate in the mock battle. Would they not have liked to join? Brother, as dense as you are, I'm sure that even you can tell they most likely would not have wanted that." Finally, Edelgard had worked up the courage to face her new teachers. Out of everyone in the class, she had been the only one to not comment. There was a reasoning in this, being that she was too dumbfounded about them picking her class. With a genuine smile on her face, she looked at them both. "My teachers, I am honored that you'll be working with us." Memories of the fight against the bandits flashed through her mind as she said this. Thinking back on it all, I think this perfectly aligns with all that's happened. I hope that you will lead us to victory, and I'm eternally grateful for you to have picked our class. Thank you. Byleth looked over to the entire group now. Whilst I will be teaching you most of what I know, just note that my sister will be going over everything with you throughout our lessons. Before we can do that, however, would anyone like to explain our situation for the next 2 days? Certainly. I'm sure Hubert has it on mind. Edelgard turned to her royal servant. Hubert, if you would be so kind. He let out a groan, but succumbed to Her Highness' orders. Certainly, Lady Edelgard. He faced the professors. We have been given 3 days, which would act as a weekend for tomorrow. The students who are to participate are normally expected to train, whilst the others can take a day off. Only 5 candidates can join for the mock battle, so I advise that it would do you well to pick out your best students. That presents an issue in itself. This was the fatal flaw that Byleth had known about for far too long. We were meant to have a month to judge our students' capabilities. How should we tell who is sufficient enough to go against the other houses now that we have so few days? Brother, that's simple. Byleth jumped up and pointed to Edelgard. We make one of them pick for us. I'm honored that you would pick me to decide. Edelgard smiled. If I were to judge my classmates based off of my personal preferences, Dorothea, Casper, Hubert, Ferdinand, and me could be the candidates. Whilst the suggested people nodded in agreement, everyone had turned to Petra with a quick feeling of guilt for not mentioning her. You must have no sorrow for me. I am wanting to still practice in my spare time. With that, the main group had already been decided. With excitement, they had all started discussing their new positions. Before long, Byleth spoke over them. Tomorrow I shall be busy, so I will be leaving your training to my sister. It has come to my attention that you are all tired. So you are free to leave if you would like. Professor, are you sure? Dorothea was dumbfounded by this kind choice. All the other classes have spent today planning. You sure we'll be able to catch up and do more tomorrow? Of course. Byleth took this answer for her brother. We'll make the introductions quick before we start aiming high. You're free to get some rest now. Let's all meet up in the training grounds tomorrow morning at around 8 a.m. In thinking that this was an order, the class responded as they normally would. Yes, miss. With all of the introductions out of the way, the class began to leave. After a while of staring upon the empty classroom, the two began to wander around the monastery grounds, back to their own living compartment. It was a small room to the northeast of the area. It contained a singular window, bland white walls, and a small desk for an individual to work on. When Byleth had seen that there was one bed, she began to grow worried, but Byleth had quickly reassured her. Would you like me to go talk to Lady Rhea for a new apartment for myself? No, it's okay. I'll go. Last I remembered, you were not good with directions, he joked mockingly. It's okay. I think I can take a look around. Very well. Byleth had little else to say, so he ended their conversation from there. Good night. Good night, brother. As Byleth entered his own room, Byleth walked off ahead. She had partly wanted to still check the grounds because of the peace and quietness within it. If Gerald had had his way, then she would still be killing bandits with her blade by now. Byleth knew full well how important her role was to her family. In most cases, she was the sword to Byleth's schemes. Because of this, she had never gotten much of a personal say in anything. Thankfully, Byleth never asked anything too gruesome of her, for if he did, then he would have to watch Byleth break herself. Hi, Professor. Byleth turned around to see Bernadetta. Hello there. What brings you here so late at night? There was a long pause of silence before Bernadetta began to mumble to herself in a panic. Oh, stupid Bernie. I can't make conversation at all. Okay, Professor, just pretend you didn't see anything. She had instantly run off. Byleth could have easily stopped her, but she did not. From simple thinking, she assumed that Bernadetta wandered the grounds at night in her free time whenever she needed something. It was strange. Bernadetta was meant to be of noble blood. From Byletta's experience with the nobility, they were often confident people, so what went wrong to cause this to Bernadetta? Byleth knew that she would get to the root of this issue eventually. After managing to finally ignore this subject, she visited Hanneman's office to speak to him, who offered her a spare key to the apartments in the dormitory building. Even if it was intended for students, Byleth assured Hanneman that she would still not mind using them. After finally finding peace in the room, she closed her eyes and began to get enveloped in her own thoughts. So much had happened on this day. Who knew what would come next? For now, she had to wait and see. Chapter 7, Crest of Flames. It was the very next day that Byleth was making his way towards the direction of Hanneman's office. He knew that his father had wanted to speak with him in private, alongside Hanneman wanting to analyze whether Byleth had a crest. Despite knowing little of what a crest actually was, he was still curious enough to try and attempt to visit his office. Meanwhile, his sister was meant to be busy looking after the other students. Would the other one be alright with teaching the children? Byleth was instantly startled at the sound of the young girl within his head, and almost made a loud sound of surprise. Oh, you simply must learn to grow accustomed to the sound of my voice. It is I who shall be with you till death do us part. You have not talked to me in a while. He whispered, so as not to alert any passing strangers. What do you wish to interrupt me for today? It would do you wise to treat me with more respect. I simply wanted to ascertain whether your sister would be capable of teaching them. Sister is highly capable of doing well without me. I am sure that she is overjoyed at the prospect of talking to them, Byleth explained, not giving it more thought. Now, you shall answer my question, who are you exactly, and why is it that my sister has a hard time noticing you? Did I not tell you that my name is Suthies? I am still unclear as to how I remember that name, and I certainly can't understand the trouble your sister has in seeing me. So this is the same answer as before, then? Byleth repeated, unamused. Do not try to act smart with me. I am no human child, after all. For you to have thought that of me when we first met drives me to the edge. I have met you many times before. Why was it only then that our previous interaction was unique out of all of our older encounters? That is most certainly a mystery. Do you think it has to do with it being a life or death situation? Rather than answering her, Byleth began to think back to his last meeting with Suthies. It was not too long ago. In fact, it was just the previous day that Suthies had saved his life. If it were not for her, then the students would not have been saved successfully. Byleth closed his eyes in lament, and thought back to when it had all first started. It happened in Remire village. When the twins had first met Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude, they had all engaged in a fight to the death against some common bandits. With his tactical skills, Byleth had made sure to send in each student in their own respective terrain. He would send Claude through the bushes to fire away at the bandits, whilst Dimitri would sneak around the area and ambush any unsuspecting goons. Edelgard was a different story. She would charge up front with the help of Byleth to cover her. Through this method, they had managed to subdue most of the bandits. When they thought that everything was settled, it ended up not being so. In an instant, the leader of the bandits had jumped up in anger. It did not matter that this was a losing fight to him, as he was consumed with rage. Nobody had noticed his dash towards Edelgard in time. Even when she realized she was going to be attacked, all Edelgard could do was pull out a simple dagger, but there was little time to even react. The only one who could react was Byleth. He made a mad dash towards the bandit. With a quick swing, the axe in the bandit's hand was making its fast way towards the flesh of Edelgard. Byleth managed to get in front of her before it could tear through her, but he did not make it in time to deflect the attack. There were now screams of realization taking place. The eyes of Claude and Dimitri had widened themselves slowly as they saw the gruesome sight begin to unfold. A cry was heard from Billet. Everything was going to end tragically, but it did not. Suddenly, the movements of everything had ceased. The air faded, leaving only humanoid entities in the vicinity of the forest. Byleth had little time to contemplate this sudden change in pace, as in an instant, he began to find himself in a different area entirely. Honestly, what are you trying to accomplish with that stunt? It's like you're trying to get me killed, you fool. A lone voice had rung through a void of nothingness. Well now, I suppose if you do not know the value of your own life, then you're not going to protect it very well, are you? Byleth looked around himself. Still, he could not find sight of the voice. All he could do was give a simple reply. I am sorry for the inconvenience. He could not believe the current situation that he was finding himself in. Within the instant that the axe was to cut through his flesh, time had stopped, and he found himself to be in the area he had visited time and time again in his dreams. He noticed it. He finally figured it out. This was the same throne, the same girl, and the same pitch-black void that he saw every 2 nights. Byleth was still too shocked to give a reply to the girl, so he continued to allow her to speak. Well, let us forget this. Every individual needs another to guide them, so you should count on me to do so for you from now on. The girl got up from her chair in excitement. I am Suthies, but you can call me, the beginning. Finally, Byleth had found out more about her. This was the person who had pestered the siblings in their dreams. For now, she seemed to be of a friendly nature towards Byleth, so he decided to continue allowing her to talk down towards him. So, it is only now that I find that your name is Suthies. Byleth could see her slowly get back to her throne. May I ask before we continue discussions over my fate about who you are? Who I am? Suthies suddenly closed her eyes in lost thoughts. Yes, it seems I do not quite remember. All I know is, my own name. I may even know less than you do on the matter. Also, you will have to forgive me, Byleth changed the conversation. But if you know what has become of me in Remire, then would you be able to tell me? Remire. Suthies took a moment to quickly recall the name. Ah, the village you were going to leave before those students came. On that note. You're but an idiot. She began shouting again. In mere seconds, that axe will tear into your flesh and render you dead. I've already seen what will happen next. It is not one for pretty sights and delicate eyes. Byleth suddenly widened his eyes in a panic. Even though he had managed to somehow stop time, it was inevitable that he would die once he came back. This was even further proved by Suthi's angry face. Please tell me what I can do. He raised his voice slightly. My father and sister are waiting for me. I do not want to cause them grief. What do you think we should do? Suthies jumped back onto her throne in boredom. Go on. It is not a fool's question. Even a mere infant could answer this. Byleth thought back to everything that had happened. From the moments of his dreams, to the very part of him jumping in time to save Edelgard, it would seem that things out of the ordinary were happening around him. In truth, he was stumped for a solution. Eventually, he knew that he should try to take a wild guess. Turning back the hands of time. Byleth answered after much consideration. There is nothing that I can do at the present. If we resume, then the axe will kill me. The only way I could truly fix this, is if I somehow find a way to rewrite my wrongs. Yes, I can turn back the hands of time. Suthies looked down on Byleth with some relief. I do believe that it can be done. I can't turn it back too far, but all is well. I'm sure you know how to fully defend yourself this time. Yes, I should be able to save her. Now that she had seen that Byleth was more observant than she would have thought, Suthies brought herself back up from her throne. With a small yawn, she moved around her hands. Suddenly, a yellow magical emblem appeared from the front of her. In it, were various symbols with patterns on them. Byleth noticed a peculiar design appear from the middle of the circle. He had seen this symbol throughout his life. Whenever he had slain any approaching enemies, he recalled that this very symbol would appear before him. Suthies, I need to ask you one more thing. It is most rude to interrupt me. She snapped back at him. Do not do anything out of the ordinary. Once you do return, we can talk then. For now, I am merely saving your life. Noticing that he was unable to find out the whole truth about the abnormalities within his life, he spoke his last words to Suthies in this meeting. My apologies. Thank you for saving my life. Was that so much to ask? Finally, Suthies smiled. You really are quite troublesome. Do not start trying to do this in future. I have my limits, you know. Before Byleth could answer, he had felt a shift in his body. He could not fully explain it, but suddenly his stomach had started feeling an ache. A variety of colors flashed in his sight. The moment of Byleth being torn to shreds via the axe was played in his mind, but then stopped. In mere seconds after he screamed, the blood that gushed out of him immediately went back onto his body. A mixture of colors overlapped everything that was happening, as the events that had transpired were played backwards. Finally, Byleth was back to reality. The girl was gone, and so was the endless black abyss that she slept in. Now, Byleth could see reality. He could see the bandit rushing in to swing his axe at Edelgard. Before even she could react, he finally rushed in and swung his sword. The two weapons began to clash for a while, but he quickly nodded towards his watchful sister, who then joined the fray and slashed her sword partway from the two clashing weapons. In an instant, the bandit's axe had been sent flying elsewhere, rendering him unable to fight. Once the bandit ran away, there was not much else everyone could do but call it a victory. This was how he had saved Edelgard. Whilst to everyone it had seemed like a normal occurrence, Byleth knew for a fact that he finally got to meet the girl on the throne. Not even his sister knew of what transpired, but he had to tell her. Since they were too busy cleaning up the bodies of the dead bandits, not much more could be said before Eloise had arrived on the scene. When Byleth had thought back to the event that had occurred before, he had realized that there were many more questions which he had yet to ask Suthies. He had noticed that if he found all of his answers with Suthies first, then he could inform his sister in full detail upon a later date. Before Byleth could speak, a voice had suddenly come up from across the corridor. Ah, Professor Byleth. I assume you are here so that we can uncover the matter of whether you have a crest. Yes, I am. Sorry for not coming sooner. It was too late to ask her, as now Hanneman had made his entrance. Nonsense. No matter how late the truth comes to me, I would still be ecstatic over finding out about it. Would you be so kind as to come inside of my office? Hanneman opened the door beside him to motion Byleth to enter. When Byleth had made his way towards the office, he could notice some stark qualities of the room that Hanneman had fixed upon. Whilst at first, it seemed to be a normal office with its assortment of shelves and windows, a closer examination of the place would reveal otherwise. The shelves on the side all had books relating to the topic of crest research. Every little piece of paper that Hanneman used to keep his notes was neatly stacked across the side of the room. Additionally, Byleth could not help but notice a strange device in the very center of the room. It will not take long to examine you. Do not worry. Would you be so kind as to donate blood to my cause? When he saw Byleth's mute reaction, he thought otherwise. Ah, do not worry. It is not completely necessary. Whilst it would have helped my research greatly, I could use a hair sample as a healthier alternative. I believe I can achieve that much without hesitation. Excellent. Hanneman began to search through his table drawers for the sight of scissors. Please excuse my abrupt nature when we first met. When it comes to the matter of crests, I simply must know the truth. I hope that you can find it in your heart to understand. Do not worry. You are not nearly as eccentric as my sister. It is nice to see that you are aware of it. Ah, yes. I forgot to mention, if you do end up having a crest, then so too does that increase the chances of your twin sister having one. So will you do examinations on both of us? In due time, I am hoping to, yes. Hanneman finally found what he was looking for within his drawer. As he pulled out the scissors, He walked up to Byleth in hopes of extracting his hair from him. With a simple snip, he had obtained a few measly hair strands to examine. Using the device which was centered in the middle of the room, he put the hair down and waited. Within a matter of seconds, finally a symbol appeared from the strange machine. Byleth noticed that this was the very same symbol which had appeared in the magic circle of Suthies. My, I simply cannot believe it. Hanuman took out his spectacle to check that this was the reality of the situation. It seems you bear a crest from the outside of my knowledge's reach. Byleth suddenly felt his attention focus on Hanuman, rather than the circle in front of him. What could that mean? I have yet to know. Hanuman began leaning his head closer to the symbol. You should know that crests are essentially power incarnate. They are gifts said to be from the goddess herself. With it, an individual can show certain buffs to magic, combat, and the like. Some even have healing benefits. For there to be a crest I have yet to know of, that brings great joy indeed to me. A fascinating new world for me to discover. How glorious a time it is for me to be alive. Hanuman seemed to be very dedicated to this cause. Since he had only just discovered this crest, Byleth thought of not asking him for the details yet. He also knew that sooner or later, he had to leave. Professor Hanuman, my father had wanted to see me soon after I finished talking to you. Is it okay for me to be excused? But of course. I've pestered you long enough, and I'll tell you about my crest research once I have further found the effects of this one. You're free to scurry along now. Byleth had wanted to say his farewell, however he noticed in an instant that Hanuman had no longer cared for his presence. With this message in mind, he made his way towards the door and left. Geralt's quarters was said to be near the opposite side of the hall. With a quick walk towards his father's room, he opened the door to see Geralt. As well as that, was an unorganized pile of forms upon his desk. It was clear that when Geralt had taken his former job as the captain of the Knights of Sirios, he had not thought it properly within his mind. Father, you wanted to see me when we were free from Rhea. About time you showed up. He put one of the forms in the jumbled mess of the others and stood up for his son. How are you finding things so far? Sister seems to be overjoyed at the prospect of teaching. I am not sure that I am getting through this as easily. They're a bunch of noble brats, I'll give you that. But look, I need to talk to you about something important. At this string of words, Byleth immediately paid his full attention to Geralt to ask him of his wishes. What is it that you want to tell me? There's a lot to get through. He sighed. Look, what I'm about to tell you should not leave this room unless absolutely necessary. You got that? Of course, Father. Good. Geralt lowered his tone now when speaking. What I want to talk to you about, it's about your sister. I'm worried about Byleth, and Rhea's another story entirely. None of this adds up. Chapter 8, Preparations. Much to their dismay, Byleth was unfortunately unable to reserve the training grounds of the academy for her class. There was a reason for this, of which Byleth was not completely at fault. When first arriving at the location on the expected time, the class had suddenly noticed they were one student short for their training. Foolishly, the group left the grounds unattended and quickly made their way to Casper to wake him up from his sleep. After that was done, they had all returned to a large room brimming with students battling it out in hopes of becoming stronger. As they had failed to get their sufficient area to train, Byleth had optimistically led them to the front of their classes, where a fairly open space of grass rested itself. Thankfully, with everyone so busy preparing elsewhere for the mock battle, Byleth had found there to be enough space for them all to test themselves. All right, we finally found it. Byleth sat on the grass in fatigue. Sorry it took a while. By now we should have finished the introductions for everyone. But of course, it surely does not reside blame in you. Hubert glared at Casper, who still was having trouble waking up completely. Even if it was your responsibility to assemble the best of us. On noticing the group staring at him, Casper snapped back to his original cheery demeanor. Hey, when you're with Linhard all day, this stuff happens to you. We can still win the mock battle tomorrow. You have disrupted Lady Edelgard's own training. If I find this to hinder her, Casper, know that I will have your head. Casper flinched at this comment. Let's not start an early bloodbath, please. Edelgard sighed. It's a little early for you to be targeting foes on my behalf right now. The important thing is that we managed to get through the obstacles presented to us. All that's left is to actually train now. We can't waste what little opportunity we've been given. At this point, curiosity grew from Dorothea. That does remind me. Does anyone know what everyone else is doing? I checked that on my original trip to the training grounds, actually. Billet stood back up. I wanted to get a look around, so I explored a bit. Last I saw of them, Linhard and Bernadetta were in the library, whilst Petra had requested to hunt out in the forest nearby the towns outside the academy. That makes sense. With so many people gone to do their training, I suppose Bernadetta has more breathing room. As for Linhard and Petra, those are their usual hobbies, though I doubt Linhard will be making anything useful of his spare time. Dorothea sighed. Actually, isn't the noble and courageous Ferdinand meant to be here? I've sent him to hunt with Petra. He should return in a few hours to train with us, but with so many people here, I figured it would be better to examine him once I got to see your skills. We shouldn't concern ourselves with them for now. Edelgard took out a wooden training axe. What matters is that we win, by any means necessary. You're right about that. In seeing Edelgard preparing herself, Billet also brought her own training sword into view. Seeing as you're so eager for training, would you like to go first, Edelgard? Gladly. Oh, seeing as I should include more people. Caspar, would you come as well? On hearing this request, Kapar brought out his own wooden axe as requested, but he was layered with confusion. For Billet to take on 2 students at once seemed to be quite a task to uphold. Noticing that their new professor might be underestimating them, he began to grow motivated. I can come along too, but are you sure it won't be too easy for us? Billet smirked. Don't worry, I'm sure I can drop my performance down to your level to just the point where you might be able to beat me. Before they began, Billet gave one last command to Dorothea and Hubert. I'm sure you two must be magic users, right? How about you try and remember the correct gestures for your spells and see if you can form it at a quick rate. Hubert and Dorothea nodded at their order. It was understandable as to why this was asked of them. As they were in the academy grounds, they could not afford to accidentally damage any of the architecture in the area. As the two were forming magic circles, Dorothea had noticed that she was not very quick to do so. In being an individual with no crest, she had some difficulty in getting dark magic to work for her. However, when pitted in the hard-working atmosphere that was Biletta's training sessions, she had wanted to surpass Hubert regardless. Even if Billet had not yet learned everything there was to being a professor, she knew just enough to go up against Edelgard and Caspar. Immediately, Caspar began to make a mad dash towards her. As she was dealing with an axe, Billet quickly turned her sword into a defensive position, and the two weapons made a loud clanging sound as they bounced off each other. Whilst Caspar was still reacting to the impact, Edelgard quickly took her chance to leap ahead and make what was to be the final strike, but Billet simply recovered from the initial shock of the hit and moved her weapon towards the hilt of Edelgard's axe. In fear of the sword hitting her arm, Edelgard let go of the axe, but before she could leap backwards to safety, she found herself lightly tapped by Biletta's sword. In all this time, Caspar had only just managed to recover from his shudder. Impressive, Edelgard smiled. To be pitted against someone of your caliber, it truly will benefit me for the coming future. How did you do that? Caspar could only lament at what had passed. I'll admit, it took me a few seconds to recover from that, but then you finished the fight whilst I was still taking that impact. What can I say? Battle goes by quickly. Billet handed Edelgard back her axe and gave a smile at the two students who went against her. I've been put in this exact situation before. Battle goes by a little too fast sometimes. It's important to get your bearings. In the past, I've gone as far as to cut my own hair to get out of being stunned, but I'll save that story for another day. It happened years ago when I was a child, anyway. Hold on. A child. We've got a mock battle tomorrow, remember? Billet quickly changed topics. How about I treat us all to dinner at the cafeteria and tell you all about it all when we take a break from training? From what I've seen, the food looks good over there. I'd rather treat some hard-working students to good food if I'm able to talk like a blabbermouth, anyway. Funny. Edelgard readied her axe. Is your brother not the reason that you don't wish to waste time? Ah, you read me like a book. This time, the two knew that their previous strategy would not work, so they decided to both approach Billet at once. Even if an axe was difficult to deal with, Billet could still counter one of them whilst jumping back and avoiding the strike of the other. As this fighting was going on, Dorothea and Hubert could only watch in wonder as their new professor proved her worth. After several hours of busy training, the group had managed to take a short break as a reward for their hard efforts. Thankfully, the main cafeteria was open for use in the academy. With it being located nearby the 3 classrooms, it was only a short walk for the group to get there. The room was quiet at first. Multiple layers of dining tables were lined up, whilst the serving desk was located on the right side of the room. As they were early, the group were given the opportunity to pick their own location to eat within. Thankfully, they had saved a space for Ferdinand and Petra before anyone could arrive. Once everyone had flooded into the cafeteria to eat, the two they had been waiting for were among them. With a quick shout and wave, the two individuals managed to reunite with their class. I am sorry that I was not present in the training even up till now, everyone. Ferdinand sat down beside Dorothea, who shifted slightly away from him. As a noble, I saw it unfit to allow Petra to go off hunting on her own. I could not stand to see her go alone. I hope you can all forgive me. Ferdinand, I think I am finding that you are too worrisome for me. Petra sighed as she too sat beside Ferdinand's opposite side. I hope I am not a disturbance to you. Hunting has brought me hungriness. I am wanting food now. Well, Petra, you're in luck. Dorothea slid a spare plate of meat towards her friend's direction. We'd be glad to have you here. Whilst everybody was in the middle of eating their foods, Billet had taken this time to evaluate the friendship groups of the class. From what she could gather, she found that Edelgard got along with everyone, however mostly confined herself to Hubert. Hubert and Dorothea had not gotten very well with Ferdinand, but the reasons for this were yet to be found, and Caspar would normally talk to Linhard, however he used this time to speak with Ferdinand and occasionally with Petra also, even though he seemed quite shy around her. Professor, I hope that you're not feeling out of place here. Edelgard suddenly faced her teacher. We all prefer to treat each other as equals, no matter what class or heritage we're from. You hopefully won't mind if we treat you like one of us, right? Oh, don't worry about me. Billet moved her hands to do a small thumbs up. I'm perfectly fine as is. I'm sure we're similar age, right? That is what I get from you, yes. Hubert had interrupted before Billet could have a chance to speak. Tell me, Professor, I have a few queries for you. Will you summon the will to answer me? Of course. Anything you wanna ask me, I'm all ears. When Billet had said this, suddenly Edelgard had flinched at this response. She had yet to notice the house leader shifting her eyes away from her as Hubert pressed on. Hubert was going to ask his question, regardless of his master's constant glares towards him. Lady Edelgard has held very high esteem towards you and your brother. From what I've been told, you are typically following orders set out by Professor Byleth, is that correct? From the nod she gave, Hubert continued onwards in his examination. Pity, I would have expected more from you. Your type never seems to last long. Hubert began laughing at his statement. In an instant after he had said this, everyone had fixed their gaze upon Hubert, in fear that he was not going to make a good impression on their friendly professor. I didn't quite get what you said. It was obvious that Biletta's confidence was instantly weakened, as she had lost her usual excitable voice. It means exactly as I said. People like you don't survive for too long. Hubert had finished up his last bite for his food and rested his chin on his fist. People like you are mere pawns. You act like you have a will of your own, but your own emotions render you susceptible to committing towards actions that you'd never before agree to. Frankly, if your brother can fight better than you, I see no use in having you around our class. By now, the table of the Black Eagles had quietened down. Dorothea and Petra had stopped conversing with each other, whilst Ferdinand and Caspar had instantly stopped progressing in their eating. All of this was done for everyone to awkwardly stare at Hubert's smile. As Hubert laughed to himself, everyone had noticed that Belletta's head was gazing down towards her food. In seeing this, Edelgard had felt a great burden in allowing her retainer the opportunity to mock their new teacher. Hubert dash. Lady Edelgard, I have no further queries for her. I've found out all that I wanted. He began to stand up from his seat. Know this, Professor, in time, you will end up being reduced to nothingness, unless you can come to grips with who you are. From your head facing downwards in shame, I can tell that I was right. I don't care too much for your presence, but if you are a hindrance to Lady Edelgard in any way, know that I will have your head separated from your shoulders. Hubert began to leave. Even if the threat had seemed out of place at the time, it was still said. Everyone had noticed that Hubert had meant every word of it. All Belette could do at this moment was clench her fists in weakness. Hubert had assumed easily that Belette was always quick to follow orders. To hear his first query be right gave Belette fear for what the future held. In time, would she truly be just a pawn? Professor, I'm so sorry for his behavior. Edelgard was the first of the students to speak. I'll be sure to discipline him when the time arrives. Hubert has always been known to be quite a grim thinker, so I ask you to pay no mind towards him. It was obvious that the words of Hubert had hit a vulnerable spot towards Belette. Whilst she was finally looking up and offering a weak smile to her students, they could tell that she was not in her usual good mood. It was up to them to cheer her up as she had done them also. In seeing it as repayment for training them professionally, they spoke words of encouragement to her. Yeah, don't listen to that guy. I can give him a stern talking to later. I shall call it my duty to right his wrongs. Professor, it's okay to see yourself as vulnerable, but you're still strong in our eyes. I am seeing great strength in you. She knew that her weak smile was what was bringing the mood of the classroom to a low point. Noticing that this was a year for her students and not herself, Belette quickly grabbed hold of her emotions and smiled from ear to ear towards her students. She spoke with the happiest voice that she could muster. Sorry for worrying you. He may be right, but I won't fall so easily. Let's all train some more after this, okay? Everyone smiled now at her words of encouragement. With a great cheer coming from the Black Eagles, suddenly everyone else in the vicinity of the cafeteria had focused their gaze on the group hurriedly eating their food to move on to their next training session. Belette laughed at this. Now, she had completely forgotten Hubert's words, and in following their example and rushing her eating, she found that her new life was going to be one of fun nature. Elsewhere in the monastery, Byleth was to be paying full attention towards the warning of his father. When he had initially said that this was a discussion about his sister, the mood in the room had suddenly shifted to one of a much darker tone. As no one would dare enter the room of the captain of the Knights of Sirios, Gerald finally had plenty of time to talk fully. Why are you concerned with her? Byleth asked. She has had her issues before, but I am sure they are gone for the time being. Before that, I want to ask if you've been keeping a safe distance from Rhea. Me and sister have organized for her to not speak within her presence. At most, I try to make short responses. As requested, we are keeping a close eye on her behavior in case any suspicious activity arises. Byleth was direct in his answering. That's good. There's a lot of reasons as to why I don't completely trust Rhea. It's all a story for another time, but I'm glad that the two of you are being careful around her. Nothing seems too harmless so far. We are to do our mock battle tomorrow, so we did not speak with the Archbishop for too long. All right, no need to extend your assurance. Gerald waved his hand up and down to get his son to lower his speech. Listen, over my years in this place, I get the feeling that the church isn't completely pure. Sooner or later, I can tell that you'll be asked to do some questionable things by them. In what way are they questionable? There won't be any right or wrong, at least, that's how it'll feel like. Byleth finally gave this statement some thought. Upon realizing the implications, he tightened his gaze on Gerald. I think it'll take a while to happen, but either way, that's a cause for concern. You are worried for sister? Byleth asked. I recall she struggled with the issue of morality before. The years we spent calming her down will go to waste, Gerald explained. His face grew tense as he spoke. It could just be a superstition, but I'm still worried. It's funny. Both you and your sister are polar opposites. She's never been one for killing. I think it stems from the opposite side of the family, but that's not gonna make it easy for us. After years of teaching her to never sympathize with everyone, I'm worried that Ria will ruin it all. We will need to survey her. There is no way of backing up now from our newfound responsibility. Yeah, there isn't. Both of the individuals in the room began to feel a dread of annoyance at this new issue. For years, the two had to watch Billette as she made a slow journey into accepting the world to be a darker place than she wanted. It had taken so long for such an innocent soul to develop into full understanding, but having her exposed to even more unique events would start it all again. I hate to say it, but we need to live with it, Gerald concluded. All Gerald could do was feign a weak smile. They both knew that deep down, nothing could be done to fix this new issue. As long as they were there to support Billette, then they could all manage. Gerald had always smiled whenever his children found a new struggle to contend with. For those people who saw Gerald's children as emotionless weapons of combat, they could never be more wrong. They meant far more to him than any weapon could. I heard that she was overjoyed to meet her new class. When I saw you two talking to the classes the other day whilst passing by, she looked more happy than we had ever seen her. Gerald reminisced to a darker time in their lives. She smiles so often, but it means so little without her enthusiasm. I think even after we thought she'd gotten through her fears, she still disliked killing bandits with us. The least we can do to repay your sister's patience, is to support her and help her avoid her fears even as a professor. I want you to do that, Byleth. You think you can do it? He did not need to think further when being asked this question. You ask a question with such an obvious answer. How small do you view my mindset? Gerald chuckled at this answer. After realizing how much time had passed in their conversation, he quickly returned to filling out the papers in his desk. Byleth decided to assist his father. For the rest of their free time in the day, the two silently helped each other sort out Gerald's new quarters. Chapter 9, The Mock Battle. The awaited day had finally arrived. With the mock battle finally here, all of the participating students had been sent into an open field situated nearby the academy's supervision. It was not much in terms of landscape, but what was there for the battlefield had provided many opportunities for a unique strategy. Within the grassy arena, were forests scattered across the middle of the grounds, with only one small opening for crossing past the thickets and bushes. Additionally, there was also a stray path which would lead towards the territories of the opposing two houses. This would have to be one of the only ways to cross through, as the Golden Deers had been sure to fence up their side of the forest in order to set up a keen ambush. Holding the front lines of it all, was Claude and Laurence, whilst Hilda had been told to stay near the middle of the grasslands to act as a shield. On the far northeastern side of the field, were the Blue Lions. In having the open pathway situated nearby them, they had made a more frontal positioning to take advantage of their given terrain. Each of them were around the two openings for the opposing houses, in hopes of luring them out for a tactical advantage. As each instructor was allowed to help order their respective houses, Hanneman and Manuela had each taken their own position as the piece which held their teams together. In the far southern side of the field, the Black Eagles were lucky to be in a safe starting position to the other two houses. Whilst they did not have a forest to defend themselves, they were of a safe range from the approaching archers of the other houses. Before starting the battle, each full house was given time to themselves to speak, in order to prepare their wooden training weapons and decide who was fit to participate. Whilst he was taking his time to observe the other two houses, Byleth had noted down the center pieces of each side of battle. If the Black Eagles had wanted a chance in winning, they would then need to take out the very people who commanded their enemies. As long as he could put them in a position where they surrendered, then they were exempt from battling further. As it was mandatory for the full class to at least attend the opening of the battle, everyone had a shocked expression when Linhard and Bernadetta had made their entrance, without needing the help of the twins to guide them. Of course, each of them were still displaying their usual introverted habits. Bernadetta still had her head to the ground, whilst Linhard was far too busy drooping his eyes over to fully understand the importance of this battle. Aside from them, Petra was the only one of the non-participating students who attended with full enthusiasm. She would even go so far as to mix herself in with Edelgard and ask her about the formation they were planning. Since this battle was Ria's way of judging the capabilities of the twins, they had both agreed that Byleth would be the one to command the class in battle. "My teachers, are you ready yet for this battle to happen?" Edelgard and Petra were among the first of those to interact with the twins. "We spent so long in keeping to ourselves when getting here, that I fear that we may be lacking for plans." "We can discuss it all when we start," Byleth assured her. "I'll be the one who will lead you for this battle. Let us prove our worth in this mock battle." Byleth also nodded her head in agreement to her brother's words. "I've already told my brother about what you all specialize in. Just trust him and all will turn out well." "So you will be sitting out this battle?" Edelgard asked. "That's about the gist of it all." Byleth gave a sneaky glare at the unattending students. "But I've been given strict orders to find out about a particular set of students' strengths and weaknesses while I'm gone, so I'll be busy myself." In an instant, both Bernadetta and Linhard had taken high alert to their teacher's plans. With a quick shudder and sigh, both of them submitted to their defeat. Petra and Byleth chuckled at this reaction, but they both quickly panned their heads towards the other members of the class. Everyone who was ready to battle had made sure to attend and were all ready to fight at any second. Whilst Caspar and Ferdinand were making sure to pick between their preferred weapons, Dorothea and Hubert were both reading up on various spells to use in combat. Now that Byleth had noticed that everything was ready, he quickly faced his sister. "With the mock battle about to begin, you will probably have to walk back to the monastery. I can take a hint." As Byleth led the 3 vacant students, she gave a sly grin to her brother. "Show them the fruits of our labor, and kick some ass whilst you're at it." As Byleth was leaving, she took one final look towards the participating students. Edelgard had clenched her wooden axe in readiness, whilst Caspar was too busy practicing swings with his own weapon. On the other side, Dorothea was cooperating with Ferdinand for once, as this was an important battle. When looking for where Hubert might be, Byleth noticed that he was beside Edelgard, which surprised her. Somehow, he had been able to mask his presence around everyone. With a simple smirk, he muttered so that only she could hear him. "Take heed for my words yesterday. You're fulfilling them as we speak." Byleth ignored this comment. It was as Edelgard and the other students had said. Hubert had a grim way of thinking about these things. In choosing to forget these thoughts, Byleth looked forward to talking to the students that had interested her the most in this class. Meanwhile, it would be the mock battle which would take place whilst she was busy talking to them. The battle to truly test the siblings' skills was upon them. Once the final preparations were made, a sound boomed out across the arena. In using a microphone to speak, Byleth instantly heard the sound of his father's voice. It would seem that he was the spectator of this battle. "The grand tradition of the mock battle will now be held in accordance with the Officers' Academy's rulings. You may now all open fire." Byleth could tell that his father was not too keen on speaking out loud, but with Rhea under his supervision it was unavoidable for him. After realizing the situation that he was in, he quickly looked over to the students, only to suddenly see a problem appear right from the start. "Let me at them." Caspar was the first to make a mad dash. "There's an open pathway there. Let's go there and make an assault." Thankfully, the rest of the students were not too quick to follow him. Before Byleth could warn Caspar, however, Ferdinand had instantly ran after him in an attempt to stop him. "Caspar, we mustn't make haste as of yet. Should we not use the forest to set an ambush, rather than expose ourselves to open fire? He won't be able to hear you with how far he's gotten so far, Ferdy." Dorothea was the second to slowly walk towards the direction of Caspar. "Although, an assault in the forest, you might just be onto something for once. Dorothea, we need to listen to the professor's orders. This is improper conduct." Ferdinand attempted to grab her arm, however she quickly shoved it away from him. "As if you nobles know anything about conduct," Dorothea snapped. After stammering for words, Ferdinand quickly regained his composure. "Very well, I shall protect a fair maiden such as yourself with ease. Lead the way into the forest." Just before anything could even be told by Byleth, 3 of the finest students had rushed headfirst into unknown territory. Byleth had wanted to stop them, but they were far too quick for him to warn. He sighed. It must have been foolish to think that he could simply ask his sister about them to learn of their traits. In retrospect, Byleth thought back to how he should have attended their training. Nevertheless, he had to adapt into his new position. A fool's act is what they imitated. Hubert smiled as he said this. Lady Edelgard, I suggest letting them disappear into the heat of battle. We have far more pressing matters to attend to, than to focus on them. It was clear that Edelgard wanted to chase after them, but deep down she too knew that it would be a losing fight. As much as I hate to say it, you're right. Even so, I do not want to lose them just yet. Suddenly, it hit him. Byleth still had two more important pieces to play in this game of warfare. Having already seen Edelgard in action before from the bandit invasion, and knowing that Hubert was always judging of his situation, he realized that he was left with his two best pieces to victory. If he played them in just the right position, then this would lead to the blunder of the others working in their favor. It was time for Byleth to announce his plan. This can work, he said. Hubert, correct me if I am wrong, but they are going towards the Blue Lion's territory, correct? Quite right, Professor. Dorothea should be able to make it through, seeing as they mostly consist of swordsmen. If she can hide in the forest for long and hold out for us, then she may be able to keep the nitwits who chased after her together with her magic. That's excellent progress then. Edelgard quickly began to ready her axe. That means we can chase after them and assist. Hubert, come. As you wish, Lady Edelgard. He bowed his head in agreement, but Byleth quickly took charge before they would act foolishly as before. Halt. You two are forgetting something of vast importance. Now Hubert and Edelgard looked at him with confusion. What they did is their responsibility. It is not up to us to save them. But we need to remember that this is a three-way battle. You do remember who leads the Golden Deers? That would be Claude. Edelgard still had trouble grasping what Byleth was trying to explain. Think back, Edelgard. When I first met you, Claude had run away from those bandits with the hope that you and Dimitri would fight for him. If my prediction is correct, that could only mean one thing. Byleth now turned towards the northwestern side of the field. He plans on using us as pawns. In an instant, Edelgard and Hubert had instantly focused their gaze too on the opposing side of the forest. Whilst Hubert had understood all that Byleth had said, Edelgard still had some trouble in noticing the implications of his speech. You're more clever than I would have thought. Hubert praised his teacher. It's no wonder that even your own sister and father follow your orders into battle. Edelgard quickly raised her hand in confusion. Forgive me for my slow pace, but how exactly is Claude going to be using us? If the professor would allow me to tell the plan for him, then I would not mind doing so. When seeing Byleth nod his head, Hubert continued. Do you not see the fencing on their side of the forest? They've heightened their defenses so that we would instinctively go towards attacking the Blue Lions. The game they are playing is to wear us out, till they could eventually pick us out one by one like the savages that they are. As of right now, because of Casper's lack of thought, we've managed to accidentally trick them into thinking that their plan is working. I see. That means if all goes right, we could make a pincer attack. Commendable efforts, both of you, Byleth acknowledged. Whether we get rid of the Blue Lions first, or the Golden Deers, this will work in our favor no matter what the situation is. We can use our previous issue as a catalyst for this plan, and that should give us a path to victory. Will you two hear me out? Of course, my teacher. Edelgard now walked closer to Byleth for advice. Hubert snickered at Byleth. I can't think of any other way to win this battle with such little numbers. So just this once, I'll entertain myself with your possibility of an outlandish scheme. Claude was always known to be an exceptional strategist. He had to be, of course, as he would always announce himself as the grandson of the elite Reagan. That was how it always was for him. With his strategy all planned out, he was sure that he could outdo the new professor that had joined the academy. That's right, even if it was the very same man who saved his life with sheer intellect, Claude was brave enough to think that he could surpass it. As long as he could pull a victory, then it did not matter how. That was how this battle would play out, and that was how it would always be played out. He had set himself up in a perfect position. In using their limited resources, Claude had found an abandoned fence and lazily fixed it upon the ground. It was a weak build, but it was convincing enough that from afar, anyone would assume that it was impregnable. From doing this, All he had to do was either ambush the Black Eagles when they approached him, or watch as they fought against the Blue Lions, weakening both sides in the process. As he had taken the front side of the forest with ease and proper protection, he had managed to convince Hilda to defend the eastern side of the forest, which was the one next to the Blue Lions. Of course, Lawrence had difficulty in trusting Claude, so he was to stay in the forest, alongside him. Lawrence was a difficult individual to deal with. As he knew how much he despised Claude's schemes, he had not informed him of the plan to distract both houses. This in turn, ended up backfiring on him. It seems that the two houses are open firing on each other. Lawrence suddenly began to exit the forest, however Claude attempted to push him back to where they had shelter. Easy, Lawrence. Now isn't the time to be too hasty. I do not need to participate in your unwieldy schemes. You have caused enough damage to erupt concern within me, so you better not do so for today. All Claude could do was sigh at this comment. Ever since he had announced himself as the legitimate heir of the Leicester Alliance, Lawrence and his family had always been the ones who admonished him for it. This eventually led to Lawrence keeping a close eye on him, however over time, Claude had learned to ignore it. After doing so for another time, he suddenly noticed movement coming from the Black Eagle's side. This was it. It must have been what Lawrence was talking about. From looking at their movements, he instantly could tell that the twins had trained them. Their movements and uncanny agility had all resembled that night when his very life was saved. As much as he wanted to admire the work that the twins had produced in a single day of preparation, he had to focus on far more pressing matters. With only 5 students allowed to participate in the mock battle, Claude had to make it his responsibility to count up whether all of the 2 opposing houses were firing at each other. If this was not the case, then further action would need to be taken. Thankfully, that was why he had Lawrence and Hilda. With them guarding the opposite sides of the forest, he would be safe even if they somehow broke through. Claude was the important chess piece in this game of warfare. Without him, there would be no tactician to take care of everyone else. When seeing the battle that was taking place on the far edge of the field, it was easy for Claude to count the amount of people. With limited area before Hilda was alerted to take action, both sides had been stuck in the forest on their far side. This meant that if Claude could squint his eyes carefully, then he could just about see who was who. He had to count 12 people, including the professors commanding their teams, in total that were in combat. After excluding the weakened numbers of the Blue Lions, the grand total had decreased to 7 people. After counting the Blue Lions, everyone was accounted for. Now it was time for the invading side's consensus. Claude had to squint his eyes even further, but when he did, he ran into a big issue. Not all of the Black Eagles were accounted for. This was not a good sign. Even if Claude had further prepared by having Lawrence and Hilda at their suggested stations, he still felt nervous when the unthinkable had actually happened. Would they attack from the front, or would they sneak through the far eastern side when nobody was watching? It was all too complicated to predict, but it had to be done. Realizing that now was an important time to reveal to Lawrence why he was in this position, Claude turned around, only to see his classmate had disappeared. That idiot, he cursed under his breath. Lawrence, where the heck are you? Whilst he had been counting up the members in the participating fight, Lawrence had gotten impatient and brought himself to be involved in the fight. With him gone, this was truly bad. Even if the fence could hold out for a decent amount of time, it would not be enough to make a quick trip to find backup. Knowing Hilda, she must have escaped somewhere to get away from the combat, or worse, submitted defeat to their enemies. Claude still had hope. If he could still think up another one of his infamous schemes, then he would finally be able to grasp victory. But first, he needed to find a better place for shelter. Whilst he had originally situated himself in the very opening of the forest, he was now encircling himself even deeper into it. After about 10 minutes of finding an optimum position, he had finally brought himself to a place where he could watch the battle, whilst also not being easily noticed by the enemy. This was where he was safest. As long as he had enough time, Claude could come up with any scheme to outdo his opponent, no matter what surprises they came with. Suddenly, Edelgard appeared. Claude would have jumped back in shock, but she did not appear for him. Rather, she came rushing into the same open pathway where her teammates had entered before to assist them. He was confused. Why was Edelgard not going for the very player that was attempting to control this game? His mind went blank at first, but then it gave one theory, then another theory, and then sooner or later, Claude had made up many explanations in a panic. Whether they sounded insane, or were completely logical, Claude was thinking up any explanations for this occurrence as possible. Finally, he stopped thinking altogether. After slapping both sides of the cheeks on his face, he rested his chin on his hand and began to reorganize his thoughts again. They had decreased his side's numbers, they had openly engaged in combat with the Blue Lions, and they had Edelgard join in with the ongoing fight, rather than having her take out Claude and using that opportunity for a surprise pincer attack. Finally, he came up with a conclusion. If it was only Edelgard, then that left only one other student and the new professor. That's right. This was a distraction. Claude had been double-baited. Before he could realize, however, he had also figured out that it was too late to turn back. It seems that you are not as crafty as I was originally told by Lady Edelgard. Claude widened his eyes in shock. He could hear the voice, but had trouble locating it. This was definitely the sound of Hubert, but it was also a sound that was behind one of the many trees in the forest. He had trouble locating this tree. He had already tired his mind from trying to think too much, and that fatigue had hindered his thought process from working properly. Suddenly, a ball of purple poison had hurled itself towards him. He saw it just in time to avoid it. With a quick dodge towards the side, he gasped for air at the instant that he got back up again. It was a miasma spell. Had he gotten hit by it, it would have numbed his senses, rendering him unable to move. There was only one good thing to come out of this attack, and this was that now Claude could easily determine the location of Hubert. After quickly picking up his bow, he made a dash towards where the miasma spell had originally come from. Immediately after he sighted Hubert, he shot an arrow. It missed. Claude was too much on edge. He could not even do simple actions such as firing close-up. The only thing that went through his mind was survival. Hubert threw another spell at him. After 3 more miasma spells had been avoided, it was clear that he was getting tired. Claude quickly picked up his bow and aimed, but Hubert raised his hand and another magic circle appeared. In a matter of very small seconds, Claude had narrowly missed a fireball spell. He watched as the burning ball of flames landed in the open dirt and then quickly disintegrated. When he finally looked at Hubert one more time, he saw that he had run out of spells. In shooting his arrow, the rules of the mock battle officially rendered Hubert as unable to battle. At this point, Hubert finally saw it permissible to smile. It was a smirk that had sent Claude's body to shake with uncontrollable concern. "You did well as a decoy, Hubert." A voice suddenly rang through the forest. "I'll take care of the rest now." It was him. The professor had finally shown himself. Now Claude did not bother to think logically. He was very near danger, so he knew that it was time to run. He began pushing through the branches, as his feet were practically being dragged by his tired movement. He was an archer. Close combat was not meant to be his strong point. Even if Claude had managed to take out Hubert, he was just a decoy for Byleth to act upon. The professor came out of a bush. Claude was close to losing. With just a narrow scrape on his body, he could easily pass it off that it was still permissible to battle. After jumping backwards, he readied his bow at lightning speed and shot again. Byleth deflected it with his sword, but then pain had hit the back of Claude. It was not Edelgard, it was not Hubert, it was not Byleth, it was Caspar. Why was he the one to give the final blow? How did this happen? All of these questions kept popping up in Claude's mind as his spiraling thoughts went out of control. "I don't get it," he spoke with a voice of defeat to Caspar. "Why are you the one to finish me here?" Caspar gave a proud look to himself and spoke up. "Out of all of us in the Black Eagles, Edelgard's the most powerful. Since we were outnumbered, she swapped places with me to take on all of the others, whilst I was instructed to help with dealing with you. It wasn't easy, I'll give you that, but if Edelgard hadn't come to us first, then we would have probably lost to the Blue Lions ages ago, had I taken them on myself. She's out there providing backup away from here, and I'm busy here dealing with you, the easy one. I can't believe it. Double decoys, multiple redirections in case of a failed plan A, an indirect pincer attack. You thought of it all, didn't you? You can thank our professor for giving you such an invigorating fight. We lost Hubert in the process, but we took you in the process. So I think it works out. Casper smiled cheekily at Claude. That was a good battle. All I need to hope right now is that Edelgard and the others can hold up and win this for us. Claude got up. He did not carry his bow and arrow this time, as he was fully admitting defeat. He smiled. This was the power of their new professor. He was able to come up with such an elaborate strategy, which paid off in the long run. This new professor had the mind that Claude was aspiring to take. With a simple sigh of defeat, he yielded. It may not have been the best of defeats for him, but it was certainly the most memorable one. Chapter 10, Victors of Conflict. After Claude had submitted to his defeat, there was little left for Manuela to do. As their tactician had been rendered unable to fight, she knew little of his previous schemes and was unable to act upon it. Needless to say, Claude's willingness to keep his battle strategy to himself was the very thing that would lead to his downfall. Once Manuela had surrendered, it was now time for the main group to act upon their planned pincer attack and join up with the secondary group that were engaging in combat with the Blue Lions. After the students did a quick cheer for celebration, Byleth had quickly raised his hand in a stance telling his students to charge into the oncoming battle. With such a tactical advantage given to them, it was now finally a good time for them to fight recklessly. With a quick sprint towards the Blue Lions' territory, Byleth and Casper began to grow impatient with their sight of victory. Elsewhere, only one of the golden deers had managed to survive. Lysithea had a difficult time in maintaining her ground. Hilda was meant to be stationed at her location, however at the first sight of danger, she had asked Lysithea to take over for her. Seeing this as an opportunity to gain more experience in battle, Lysithea accepted this offer initially, but was quick to regret it. She was the only one to have survived by this point. Ignatz was foolish and approached head-on, whilst Hilda made a commendable effort in defending herself, but she eventually resigned her efforts towards the smallest hint of loss. As of now, Lysithea was in a brutal fight between Dorothea. Both of them were fierce in combat. As they were both magic users, they had chosen to fight from afar. With quick dodging, rolling, and shooting, a variety of spells were flung across the field, causing the grasslands to create mounds of damaged patches on them. As she had always been one for studying, Lysithea was quick in learning all of the spells that were provided in the books around the academy. Sooner or later, she knew that Dorothea would run out of her Thoron spell. It was a powerful spell that would fire a tough blue laser across a far range, but was difficult to control. Thankfully, Dorothea looked as if she was on the verge of fatigue. This was it. Finally, Lysithea could unleash her next batch of spells. To her, Dorothea's biggest blunder was not studying enough. With a cocky smirk, she began to rush in to deal her final blow, but then something had happened. Edelgard had appeared. Rather than swinging her wooden axe towards her direction, she lunged forth and pushed Lysithea aside, taking the damage of a miasma spell in the process. This was a shock. How was Edelgard still standing up? Edelgard simply dismissed Dorothea, ordering her to join up with the ongoing battle, before she returned to focusing her attention on her enemy. With a large feeling of annoyance, Lysithea knew that simply rushing in and overwhelming her was enough to deal with her. As she dashed towards Edelgard, she quickly dodged yet another of her miasma spells. After a quick push, she was pinned to the ground. All Lysithea could do was scream in shock at this unforeseen action. "Let go of me. I apologize, I didn't mean to grapple onto you so hard." Edelgard loosened her grip, but then stopped doing so when she gazed at the long, white hair of her enemy. "Before I let you go, I would like to ask a question. Would that be all right? Wouldn't studying up on it be better than asking me in the middle of a battle?" It was clear that the tough grip of Edelgard was making her desperate for freedom. "I don't have time for this dash. Your hair." Edelgard whispered this, so as not to allow anyone else to accidentally hear. "I have heard that the house where you are from, the Ordelia family, does not traditionally have white hair within their DNA. Tell me, was your hair not always like this?" In an instant, Lysithea widened her eyes in shock. Did she know about Lysithea's circumstances? If so, then how did she come to find out? As Edelgard finally loosened her grip on Lysithea, it did not help that now all of her thoughts were focused on this certain issue. Both sides had wanted to interrogate each other and ask their own set of questions, but in these conditions, they knew that this was simply not a possibility. "What are you possibly talking about?" Lysithea lied, hoping Edelgard was foolish enough to think she had her information wrong. "I've rendered you unable to battle." Edelgard switched the topic of conversation as she got back up. "Further retaliation is prone to leading to the disqualification of your entire house. You should return back to the monastery before somebody confuses you for a participant." "Wait dash. I can find better times to speak with you later. I'll do absolutely anything necessary to win this battle, even if it means prolonging the time until we have this discussion." At this point, Lysithea had stopped her questioning any further. With a sigh, she accepted her position and got back up. Before any further interaction could happen between the two, Edelgard had continued running towards the direction of the continuing battle. Whilst Lysithea had typically never enjoyed losing, this battle between her and the house leader of the Black Eagles had given her a different feeling. With only time to hold their conversation back, Lysithea could only wonder what Edelgard had wanted to tell her. There were a few more people to get rid of from the other houses. With only Dimitri, Didu, and Mercedes left in the battlefield, they had grown more determined and began to pull out their greatest attacks in hopes of winning their battle. Because of this, the group had a hard time trying to continue a frontal assault. Whilst he quickly took out Mercedes with little difficulty, Ferdinand was struggling in taking over the last two survivors of the battle. Dimitri was an extremely skilled fighter. Without even needing to put in extraneous effort, his lance was exceptional in giving swift, but hard attacks towards the Black Eagles. Additionally, Didu had acted as his master's shield, and was staying in front of him. If he wanted to defeat Dimitri, then Didu would have to be gotten rid of first. When Edelgard had finally caught up to the difficult battle, Ferdinand had a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Edelgard, please allow us to finally find out who is truly better at combat. Your insistent rivalry with me simply has to stop." Edelgard sighed at his stubborn nature. "Do you know where Dorothea has run off to? She became too fatigued from casting too many spells in her previous battle. She told me that she was retreating, so I offered to take up arms for her." After accepting this answer, Edelgard and Ferdinand quickly rolled to the side as they barely escaped the harsh swing of Didu's axe. Taking a quick pause for short rest, they both attempted to rush into combat. Somehow, even with Edelgard's axe and Ferdinand's lance, they were both having an extremely difficult time in weakening Didu. "I will do anything to win for His Highness." Didu proceeded to swing his axe once more. "Nonsense." Ferdinand had jumped back to avoid the swing. "You are nothing but a hindrance for us. Allow me to act nobly, and win this duel in a manner befitting of the nobility." Suddenly, Byleth and Caspar appeared from their sight. As soon as they were spotted, Didu had jumped back in surprise. He would have thought that Claude would have taken care of most of them, so why was it that there were still more reinforcements from the Black Eagles? After the pair had spotted their new batch of units, Ferdinand lightly pushed Edelgard forward. "I believe we can handle the rest for now." He gave a proud smile towards her. "See to it that you do not disappoint me. Do not worry. Just this once, I'll play your games." Edelgard ran ahead. Further forward, stood Dimitri, who was the final key piece in finishing the mock battle. Charging relentlessly, she readied her nerves for the battle ahead. Meanwhile, Didu had quickly tried to run in order to catch up and stop Edelgard, but was quickly stopped by an axe that had flown towards him. After deflecting it with his own, Caspar speedily ran up and picked it back up again. With only two members of the opposition left, there was only Ferdinand, Caspar, and Byleth to take care of Didu. Should the match continue for longer, they would rendezvous with Edelgard and assist her battle. This was truly it. After Dimitri was done, taking out Hanuman would be an easy enough effort for everyone. When they had both spotted each other, Dimitri and Edelgard had instantly rushed into one another for an attack. With the loud sound of their weapons clashing together, the two opponents gave determined glares. "I am afraid that I cannot let you pass easily, Edelgard. Even if you have the guidance of an esteemed professor, we still have a chance of winning against you." "I would not be so sure to think such a thing." "Well, the only way for us to find out is to fight in this mock battle. You're right. After separating their weapons from each other, Dmitri ran towards her again for a frontal assault. Noticing this, Edelgard quickly swung her axe down below, redirecting the lance instead to the direction of her leg, piercing a small part of her skin in the process. With a small cry of pain, Edelgard had to get up. It was the only way that she would have hoped to win this battle. Even if our class was put in unfavorable circumstances, I would still like you to know something. Edelgard trudged through her pain whilst walking to the direction of her foe. In the Black Eagle House, we make it our solemn duty to win under any means necessary. It was a risky move, but she had to perform it anyway. Without so much as a regard for the slow bruise in her legs, Edelgard quickly threw her axe. It was a heavy weapon, despite being made out of wood. Dmitri noticed this, and managed to successfully dodge its strike, but Edelgard ran. She ignored the bruises, aches, and pains that were being given off of her body. In the past, she had endured so much worse than this. If she could just run towards her goal for even a little bit longer, then she was sure she would make it. You're not going to win. Dmitri poised his lance back at her. I won't let you. Suddenly his voice raised itself. Edelgard had no time to be surprised by her rival's first shout of sudden anger. Her chance of victory was beside her. Just as she did before, she bashed her elbow across the wooden plating of the lance, ignoring the scrapes and blisters it was making across her skin as it tore through her uniform. Once it was finally down, she proceeded to begin launching her other fist towards Dmitri. He noticed, and quickly countered by dropping his lance entirely and blocking her with the strength of his two hands. It was silent for a few seconds, but then finally Edelgard spoke. Given your crest, you're free to crush my hands with that power gifted to you. Why aren't you doing that? I could never do it to you, Edelgard. Dmitri gave a solemn smile at her, to which she answered in slight confusion. Whatever your reasons for holding back at me, let it be known that it shall be your downfall on this day. She threw a kick to Dmitri's leg, causing him to instinctively grab it in pain. This in turn, finally gave her the opening she needed to throw a punch. As always, Edelgard did not hold back, however her enemy was quick to react. After having recovered from the punch thrown at him, Dmitri backed away for a second, only to be thrown downwards by Edelgard. Dmitri tried his best to get back up, however with him being caught by surprise, this was a difficult task. Edelgard was strong. Despite having had her body bruised earlier, she made sure to tug Dmitri down on the ground to force him to surrender, but he kept resisting. The two were at war, as Edelgard refused to let him get up. She continued pressing herself on him. All of a sudden, a symbol appeared from atop them. It was a green glow. The crest that Dmitri harbored in him was one that gave him unimaginable brute strength when he needed it most. After realizing that he was to push Edelgard back onto the soil as well, she had to think fast. The symbol meant that Dmitri was to use his crest. Frantically, Edelgard reached into her waist and pulled out a weapon from her small sheath. Once he saw the dagger in her hand, Dmitri lay in silence. It was sudden. Whilst people would normally question why he had done this, it was all too clear to Dmitri. After sighing, he spoke. That dagger, where did you get it? My apologies, Edelgard stammered. I seem to have forgotten that we were only permitted to training weapons. Although I can't quite recall how I got it, I've had this dagger since I was a child is all. I simply forgot to put it away. Is that so? Dmitri had now finally stopped resisting. I have no reason to fight any longer. It seems I will have to concede defeat for today. Is that so? The dagger was accidental. Normally I would assume that you might argue for a fair fight. You said it yourself, that you would win under any means. You should accept this victory. I do not mind. It is clear that your teachers have made sure to instruct you well. You pinned me down, and in a matter of battle, you could easily have had an ally come in and strike my finishing blow. I suppose you're right. After finally getting up, Edelgard now had taken the time to check her scar. It was nothing major. She knew that with Hubert's assistance, she could fix the small rip on her sleeves back to normal. After sighing in relief, suddenly a voice rang across the field. With the surrender from Professor Hanneman. It was Gerald speaking. The winner of this year's mock battle is the Black Eagle House. Even if the battlefield was a large area, Edelgard and Dmitri could hear the cries of victory from their house across the other side. With a smile of relief, Edelgard slumped on the ground with fatigue. It was finally over. The mock battle had been won. Finally, they could relax. They had won. When they all walked back to the monastery, Byleth had felt pleased at the fact that he had proved his worth to Rhea. It was likely that the rest of the dormant students had heard about this too, and knowing his sister, they were most likely going to organize a grand feast to celebrate as a class. When he looked over at the smiles of the rest of his class, he could see extreme levels of happiness within them. "Professor, that strategy for a pincer attack was nothing short of amazing." Edelgard tapped his shoulder in hopes of getting Byleth's attention. "From the looks of it, it seems that our year with you and your sister will be much improved from the one we were supposed to get of our previous teacher." It would seem that this battle had resonated with all of the students, as each of them were focusing their attention towards Byleth. Whilst on their initial way towards the battlefield, the students had kept to themselves in fear that Byleth possessed authority over them. They were surprised to find out that even if he was different from his sister, he did not see the students merely as pawns. It was because of this, that the students had now begun to walk closer to Byleth on their way back to the monastery. Byleth was not yet used to this completely. Sure, his sister could easily interact with the students and offer friendly smiles and advice, but her brother was of a different case. Even still, he was slowly starting to see why Byleth had felt so passionately about picking the class of the Black Eagle House. After looking at the students individually, he spoke calmly over them without enforcing his authority. "What was it that made you all truly begin to trust me after this battle?" "You don't know." Casper could not help but shout out his reaction. "You pretty much carried us through it all. Even with my brash moves, you still honed it and saved almost all of us." Hubert nodded his head in agreement and quickly cut in before anyone else could state their own opinion. "Agreed. Even if I acted as a decoy, had I not been so clingy to the success rate of your scheme, then I would have possibly defended myself properly. Your intentions were for me to survive that battle, but even if the opposite happened, you had still taken time to preserve the casualties to a minimum. Do not only have gratitude for me alone," Byleth commented, so as not to allow the students' thoughts to wander. "I'm certain that my sister had helped you all tremendously before the battle." "Oh yeah, that's right," Dorothea thought back to the day before. Professor Byleth was a really good motivator. Even if she didn't know how to properly cast magic spells, she showed me some good revision techniques to revise all of it. It's because of her that I managed to survive against Lysithea for so long. Ferdinand was also quick to realize just how much Byleth had helped him as well. As a noble, I feel it is only my duty to also give my gratitude to her as well. She is the one who taught me the proper handling of a lance, after all. Byleth took note of the compliments being given towards his sister. Once they had made their entrance into the monastery, he knew the joy that his sister would show would be immense. As predicted, Byleth was extremely happy. As it was around lunchtime, the cafeteria was now being used by all of the students. As soon as the group noticed that Byleth and her set of students saved open spaces for them to sit on, they were more than happy to join them. With big smiles on their faces, they began to tell the others all about the mock battle. It was incredible, Casper muffled midway whilst chewing on his piece of meat. "We went from the front like Wapow. And they went from the back. Sooner or later. Bam. We won the battle. Bam." Byleth was surprised by this outcome. It really went bam. "Yeah, bam." Casper leaned in closer to Byleth with open enthusiasm. "I'd even go so far as to say it was a power bang." "No way. That must be pretty big." "Sister, how did you understand a word of that?" Byleth sighed at this strange interaction. "You should read up on things more, brother. Common English is kind of important for your daily life, you know." "Oh, please. That was anything but English." At this remark, the whole class laughed in tandem, leaving both Byleth and Casper to glare at everyone with slightly annoyed feelings. What surprised them most though, was that for once in their lives, Bernadetta and Linhard were contributing a fair amount into the conversations. Sure, they did not speak as much as everyone else, but what was really impressive was that Bernadetta would finally speak of her own free will. Granted, it was not always of the highest of confidence, but her effort was appreciated by the whole class. Professor Byleth, Edelgard's eyes shone with adoration for the previous battle. Can you tell them about the pincer strategy we made? Another one of those. Billette groaned in annoyance. You never tire of using that technique in battle, do you? They are effective and cost-efficient. I see no reason against using them. I should warn you all, Billette lowered her voice to a small whisper for her class. Come the next few months, you'll all be drowned out by the idea of a pincer attack. You make no effort in annoying me. I try, Billette gave a cheeky smile. Enough stalling. You should explain the story now. Thank you, Byleth relented. As Byleth began to explain, the class had now wholeheartedly found their place with their new professors. Even if it was unusual to have two of them, or have them be a much younger age than them, they still had a certain charm to them that the class could resonate with. Their friendly banter was always fun to listen to, as well as their ways of teaching. Even if they had only had them as their new teachers for 3 days so far, the Black Eagle House could certainly feel that they always had them as their teachers. Their opposing personalities and kind natures were a refreshment for the class. As they listened to the story of the pincer attack, Billette, Casper, and Dorothea would always interrupt to dramatize points in the story, which always ended up annoying Byleth. Everyone would of course giggle over this reaction, whilst Hubert would simply groan at these minor inconveniences to the narrative. Soon enough, this fun meeting was quickly cut short after Byleth had finished narrating the events of the mock battle. This was partly due to everyone's attention suddenly fixing upon a new arrival in the cafeteria. In an instant, all of the students on the area had taken attention to Seath walking towards the Black Eagle's table. After giving a submissive glare at the twins, B spoke without wanting to sit beside them. It would seem that Lady Rhea would like to discuss your recent endeavors with you. Very well. Billette answered without showing her slight annoyance. Would you care to allow us to finish what we were eating? I'll have you know, that the professors normally eat in the faculty office. I know you have a younger age than the rest, but acts like this can still be considered childish. Billette had instantly felt annoyed at this remark. Before she could react, her brother quickly stood up, as if to tell her to ignore Seath and obey his orders. Even if he had scrutinized every action that she had done, Billette was still getting impatient at Seath's aggression towards them. Realizing that there was nothing they could do to avoid this, she simply got up too and gave a final word to the students. Next week will be our first proper lesson. She gave a bright smile towards them. Don't be late. I still have lots to tell you all about us. As the three began to leave, the Black Eagles watched as they began to lose the centerpiece of their previous conversation. Even if they had only met for a short duration, each of the students had wanted to know more about them. At least for now, they would need to control themselves and wait for the correct time. When they had entered Rhea's quarters once again, she had been in her usual standing position to greet them. With a translucent smile, she walked closer to them and spoke. You have both done exceptionally well in winning the mock battle. I hope that you can keep up this behavior for the majority of the coming months, as well as for the assigned mission next month. Mission. The twins were confused at first, however Seath quickly took charge and spoke for Rhea. As a standard for the Knights of Sirios, they are all expected to perform good deeds every day. The students within the academy are no exception. As such, every month we send out each class to help the needy and take care of troubles that they may be going through. It would do you well to train and improve the ethics of both you and your students, or else you may fail to meet our expectations. Thank you, Seath, Rhea acknowledged. Regarding next month's mission, we have spotted some bandits hiding in the midst of the Xanadu, the Red Canyon. We have already dispatched the Knights of Sirios to look for any danger, and it seems that you should be able to dispel them soon enough. I want you and your class to journey there at the end of the month, and free them from the sinful life that they adopted. After nodding at this order, Byleth finally found his space to reply. We will try to teach them to the best of our ability. That is all I could ever ask for, she thanked. Well then, that is all I had wished to speak with you about. Rhea dismissed them. If you ever need guidance, then know that I will be more than happy to oblige with helping you. Thank you, both of the twins replied. As they had left, Seath looked towards Rhea. Finally, he had seen that these mercenaries were far more capable than they would seem. Even if he wanted to apologize for his behavior towards them, his role as the Archbishop's advisor had led him to see them as unfit to teach the academy. As it stood, there would be little else that could be done to change their minds. We still have many enemies to be rid of. Rhea spoke amidst the silence. I believe we have found the key to our troubles. Rhea, I don't believe that this is a wise decision. Should we really entrust them as professors? I have made my decision, Seath. You are to have peace with it, and that is an order. She never issued orders to Seath very often, so for him to hear this from her was a shock. Very well. Please excuse me. I feel that I was overstepping my boundaries. All has been forgiven in the eyes of the goddess. You're free to excuse yourself. Thank you. As Seath began to leave, Rhea sat back down on her throne. It was almost ironic that the bandits were in the Red Canyon. Whilst she doubted that it would trigger any good to happen for her, there was always a slim chance that she could be surprised. Losing her serene smile, she sighed. Patience would truly be a virtue. Soon enough, everything would fall in place. Check the description for the links to the author.